Okay, everyone, it's about noon, and we're going to get started here. Again, my name is Deirdre Connor. I'm with the Jacksonville Public Education Fund, and this is our very first webinar, so we're excited to have you here. A few housekeeping items before we begin. We're going to be taking questions throughout the webinar, and you should see a panel on your right where you can submit a question. So we encourage you to do that, and we'll be taking those questions not just at the end, but throughout our entire time together. We're going to end precisely at 1 o'clock, if not before. And make sure to submit your question early so we can get to it. So now I'd like to introduce our presenter for today, Trey Czar. He's the president of the Jacksonville Public Education Fund, and he's going to be supported by Dr. Jason Rose, who's our director of data and research. We're also going to be joined today by Dr. Nikolai Vitti, superintendent of Duval County Public Schools. He's going to be calling in from Tallahassee, where he is today, working with the legislature on this and many other different issues. So I'm going to hand it over to Trey to get started, and we'll start answering your questions, hopefully after the first couple of slides.
Thank you, Deirdre. I'm very excited to have everyone on the call. And it's always nice, I think, on these very impersonal webinars to have a sense of who's on the call. And so as we looked over the list of registrants, it really is a diverse group of attendees. We have representatives from more than 10 different school districts throughout the state of Florida, a number of different advocacy groups around the state, as well as a number of citizens in both the Duval County area and across the state. And so really just want to say welcome to you all. We're very glad you could join us. And we hope that if you find today's presentation interesting, that you encourage your colleagues and friends to join us this evening for a second encore presentation of this same exact topic. So before we get started, I wanted to spend just a minute to tell you a little bit about the Jacksonville Public Education Fund. We are a independent nonprofit in Jacksonville that really sees a key part of our role to make sure the community understands important education issues and is mobilized and ready to advocate on behalf of universally high quality public schools. So we've seen a tremendous buy-in here in Duval County to public schools. We see a growing support for our public schools, and we're very excited to continue to play this role here. And as Deirdre said, we have Dr. Jason Rose, our Director of Data and Research, on the phone with us today, as well as are expecting Dr. Nikolai Vitti from Duval County Public Schools a little bit later, and we'll give him a chance to share his perspective on some of this information in just a few minutes. So as we go back to take a look at school grades, it's important that we look at the history of the school grading system. Florida has the oldest A through F grading system in the country, and while it's been very informative and very important to our state throughout the last more than 10 years, it's really starting to show signs of its old age. Over the last several years, there have been a slew of changes to the school grading system, more than 16 since 2010. And that's made for a lot of controversy and left parents and citizens fairly confused about how schools are graded and what those grades really mean. But here's the good news. Right now, we really believe very strongly that we have an invaluable opportunity to hit the reset button on school grades, to reinvent the system, to make it more meaningful and stable moving forward. That's partially because this year, the state is transitioning to new math and language arts standards called the Florida Standards. These are set to be fully implemented in public schools throughout the state next year. And moving to these new standards means that our students in Florida won't take FCAT anymore, and will instead take a different test to be determined that will measure how well they're performing against these new standards, and really, from our perspective, hope that we continue to raise the bar for K through 12 education in the state of Florida. So the key question is why is this so important? It's really because school grades are used in so many very different ways. First of all, we all use them as parents. We did a recent public opinion poll here in Duval County and found that school grades are by a factor of 2 to 1, more often used in evaluating the quality of a school by parents and prospective parents than any other factor, including word of mouth. Like it or not, people use school grades, and so it's critically important that they're evaluated, that they're calculated in the right way and include the right factors. In addition, these school grades yield all sorts of impacts for their local school districts and school personnel. Schools and personnel can receive financial bonuses from the state for good performance, and they can also receive penalties and sanctions for consistent poor performance. In addition, many districts, including our own here in Duval, use school grades as one, if not the only, one of the primary factors in their school evaluation and accountability measures at a district level. So while they're used very frequently, all of the changes that have happened in recent years have really sown confusion and mistrust. It's important that our state really capitalize upon this opportunity over the next few months to modernize our school grading system and make it more stable in the future. So when we look at the question of how do we do that, that was really the topic for a paper we issued just a couple of months ago called Understanding and Updating School Grades for Florida's Future. And that paper is available on our website. I hope most of you have seen it. And it really highlights 5 key recommendations. And you can see them there on your screen. I'm not going to go in depth on them, but want to just talk quickly about 2. One of the key things that we argued for was that growth should be emphasized, particularly growth over multiple years. When we look at the balance of growth, how much progress a student's making in a single academic year, and proficiency, are they meeting certain benchmarks for performance? We really believe very strongly that growth is a better measure of school performance, whereas proficiency is often clouded by a number of different demographic factors that students carry with them into schools. They're both very important, but we think that there's a strong need for additional focus and additional emphasis on growth. Secondly, and as you may have seen on our title slide, we recommended that the state consider spreading the ranges for grades. How many points make an A, B, C, D, or F more evenly? Right now, as you see from the 2 gauges on your screen, there's a very thin area for B, C, and D grades, which means that it leads to quite a bit of instability in the system. That schools can and do move significantly with very little changes to their overall points. And so we think that by spreading these out more evenly, you get more of a traditional, you get more of a traditional bell curve, and you get a system that's much more stable. So again, I would encourage you to check out this paper, but really the focus of this call is what's happened since. And so since issuing this paper in January, a lot has happened. The issue of school grades is really taking center stage, and has become a large source of discussion and debate around those entities which have a say over the future of our school grade system, and that's primarily the Florida Department of Education and the state and the state legislature. So as we look at the Florida Department of Education, here's a short timeline of what has led up into where we are today. Back at the beginning of January, Education Commissioner Pam Stewart introduced her outline for how the Department of Ed would move forward with its changes to the school accountability system. By the middle of February, she had presented more information to the State Board of Education, who will make a lot of these final decisions. At that same board meeting in the middle of February, just a few weeks ago, the State Board of Education also approved these new Florida standards that we've talked so much about, based largely upon the Common Core standards, but also incorporating a few key things that the state of Florida felt were important for its students. At the end of February, Commissioner Stewart had further conversations with the House Education Committee. And finally, coming up in just a couple of weeks, on March 18th, we expect the commissioner and the State Board of Education to further discussions about a new statewide assessment. So as we look at a little bit broader of a transition timeline, you can see here as we look prospectively into the future, we do have FCAT that will be administered this spring and then this summer, school grades will be released with the current formula and current accountability measures. Next spring will be the first time that a new assessment is administered, and what that assessment is, again, will not be decided until the middle of March. As we look forward from there, baseline school grades will be released according to the plans right now in fall of 2015, And then school grades will be first used with consequences in the summer of 2016. So there's a couple of years of transition here that are moving forward, and we'll talk a little bit more about what our views are for that transition period in just a little bit. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, again, Dr. Jason Rose, the Jacksonville Public Education Fund's Director of Data and Research, to talk about in a little bit more depth about the specific proposal that the Florida Department of Education has put forth, and turn it over to him.
Great, thanks, Trey. So what we really want to do for you is, for those who are not familiar, really frame for you what the Department of Education is proposing and how that would be different from what the current system looks like now. And we'll get into, after that, some things that have more recently been changed or looked at for change in the legislature. But to give everyone a common framework, when the state came out with their plan, they really said we want to simplify this formula. We want to focus on 3 areas: student achievement, graduation rate, and learning gains. And some of the real high-level important features that they were promoting with their plan were, they did want to report A to F scale grades based on a percentage of total points earned, whereas right now each elementary, middle, combination, and high school is on a different scale of total potential points they can earn, and it's reported as, the number of points earned out of that scale. They wanted to simplify that and make it all percentage of possible points earned out of 100%, make it more intuitively aligned with what we think about in terms of the way we grade students, the way we think about grades. They mentioned wanting to reset the grading scale to require a rigorous standard and to avoid some of those compression issues we talked about. And so this is a positive step. They're talking about acknowledging the narrow bands of B, C, and D schools, and really setting those thresholds for what is an A school, what is a B school, what is a D school, at points that are more stable and things that are more aligned with maybe what we think about in terms of what you would need to earn an A, you would need to earn a B. They also acknowledge the need for a periodic review of the grading scale, and that they are really focused on trying to release all of school grades in the summer together, as opposed to currently releasing elementary and middle schools in the summer and high schools later in the fall. We'll talk about those last 2 in a little bit in our feedback. On the next few slides, what we really want to do is really visually, clearly put up for you, this is what the current system looks like at the elementary, middle, and high school. This is what the FDOE's proposed formula would look like and how it would look differently. I'm not going to talk through every portion of these slides. What I am going to do is really just highlight the differences between the current formula and the proposed formula from the state's perspective. These slides will be available for you to download and have this information, and then we'll also be available to ask questions.
Jason, before we go through those slides, we do have a question from Zach. He says, is this proposed timeline from the Department of Education set in stone, or is there any wiggle room?
I don't believe anything is set in stone, but we're going to certainly talk in our recommendations about our thoughts about the timeline and where we think that both the Department of Ed and the legislature are leaning in terms of what they're most firm on, and what we really think that there's more room to wiggle on. But that is going to be an important focus of this feedback. And if we can hang on to that for a second, Zach, we're going to get back to that very specifically.
Great.
So looking at the elementary schools, this is really where there's the least amount of change. The only real thing that you see is that instead of having a unique writing component, in the new assessment, writing is expected to be wrapped into an overall English language arts section, which would really replace reading. So they would still measure writing, it wouldn't be its own section. And the only other major difference is that in the current formula, there are a number of triggers and bonus clauses that you can see at the bottom. For example, if fewer than 50% of the lowest 25% demonstrate gains in reading or math, a school would be automatically lowered a letter grade from the points they earned. Those are all listed at the bottom. Those would be eliminated in the current formula. It would just be based on the points you earn and where that falls in the threshold. Moving on to elementary school, middle schools, we see a few more changes. Give the slide a moment here to catch up. Okay, here we are. Really the same thing. Writing is wrapped into reading as a broader English language arts component. And in the original Florida Department of Ed proposal, accelerated coursework participation and performance were eliminated for the middle school level. Now, since then, the Senate Education Committee has resubmitted a bill that returns a lot of that to the middle school. So we'll talk about that in the legislative updates. And again, the bonus and penalty clauses are removed. The last one we're going to look at is the area where the most things have changed, and that's the high school grading formula. And it is coming up. Here it is. So again, same thing, writing wrapped into English language arts. It's not its own individual component, but the real major changes in this are the existing formula had a lot of individual components focused on college readiness and accelerated coursework participation. The proposed formula by the Department of Education eliminates accelerated coursework participation and the two college readiness reading and math exam score components as individual components. Now, in their justification, to be clear and to be fair, the Department of Education has stated the position that they think accelerated coursework performance itself is the most comprehensive indicator of college readiness, and that by including all students eligible to take those courses in the denominator, it still encourages schools to promote participation in those courses, and it won't diminish that. That is their perspective. There is some validity to that argument. We have some concerns still that overall, by eliminating those as individual components, you reduce the overall focus on college readiness from previously what was about 31% of a school's total grade to now it would be 10% of a school's total grade. And it changes the motivation to really focus on those when you're considering school grades. The other major change is that the graduation rate they've eliminated the 5-year and the at-risk graduation rates and focus just on the single 4-year graduation rate. We'll talk a little more about all this in our feedback. I wanted to move through those very quickly because there's a lot of information and it'll be there for you to download or look at if you want, but please feel free to ask questions if you have any. Type it in the chat area. We can stop and go back to anything. But just as an overall summary, I want to talk about some of the positive things and some of our concerns with what we just looked at, and Trey will then take us into what we've seen from the legislature since then to address or not address any of those. So in terms of positive steps, there are some good things. Acknowledging that the grade scale needs to be reset to be more meaningful, more stable, and just better reflect what parents would think of as A, B, C, D, or F schools. There's been no specifics on that yet, so we can't really comment on where it's being reset or what we think the impact of that may be. But it is a step in the right direction, we think. Acknowledging the need to schedule periodic reviews of the scaling components, we think, is also important. Again, there's no specifics on that. In our paper, we really were clear about saying, as more than just acknowledging, we think that they should firmly set windows of 3 to 5 years where they allow for reviews and changes of assessments or thresholds or proficiency levels or anything like that, and remain stable with everything in between. One of the biggest issues is things with the formula changing year to year and changing so fast that no one can keep up with them. So we think it's a step in the right direction to acknowledge these things should be done periodically. We would encourage a more specific plan for that. The elimination of extra bonuses and penalties, clauses beyond the points, I think it helps really clarify a lot of things. And at the very least, the suspension of sanctions attached to baseline year grades, what the state is calling baseline year grades, which are the first grades that they're scheduling to release next year. At a very minimum, we think that's a positive step. We're going to sort of go a little further in our feedback and say that we think they should actually go a little further in holding off on those grades. But at the very minimum, suspending accountability sanctions in the first year is important. Some of our concerns, we think that moving directly to issuing school grades next year, even if they are baseline grades with a held harmless provision, we think that there's some real issues that timeline may present in terms of being able to calculate and communicate those first year grades. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. We think that we'd like to see, as we said in the paper, more of a consideration in thinking about how we measure growth as opposed to just continuing to calculate it the same way we do now. There's a lot of information in the paper about the instability of year-to-year snapshots I can answer any questions about those, but again, not going to go through the paper entirely unless anyone has a specific question, but it is available on the website. We are also concerned, and we agree with some concern raised by our local superintendent and others of the elimination of all those individual components for college readiness. While you still may be measuring college readiness to some degree with accelerated coursework performance, and some of the things that the legislature has moved to put back into counting towards that, we think the reduction of the total amount of points that college readiness factors account for really devalues an emphasis on college readiness that the state has really been a leader on in the last few years. And finally, this we didn't talk about this much in walking through, but in that focus to get all of the school grades out in the summer together, one of the reasons high school grades come out later than elementary and middle school grades is because the components that include graduation rate and college readiness factors are not completely calculated until after the summer. Some students are taking summer work, are doing things that will count towards those factors. In order to get all grades out at the same time, one option the state is looking at is using what we call lag data or old data, meaning that they're going to use last year's graduation rate and college readiness scores with this year's test performance scores to get the grades out earlier. And we have some concerns with what that would do in terms of contributing to confusion or public understanding of what this year's grades mean. I think really we just like to see more of a firm plan for that, and how that, what the justification for that is, and why it outweighs waiting a few months to have all the current data together, and whether there would be some implications in terms of schools would already know their graduation and college readiness components at the beginning of the year for that grade that year that they're going to be graded. They would know all those points ahead of time. Would that change how they focus on those things year to year? It may not, but these are things that we think should really be explored and given sufficient time to really look at. So
we actually have a question, Jason.
Okay,
this comes from Ken, and he's asking, in the commissioner's presentation, she recommends establishing learning gains that require students who score below grade level that grow toward grade level performance be a part of learning gains. And then the second portion requires students already at grade level to progress beyond grade level performance. But in the past, a student that maintained a level 3 from one year to the next made 1 year of growth, and now a student must earn beyond grade level. Is this correct? And has there been any discussion about this?
I have seen that language in there, and in some of the legislative, proposals. One of the reasons that students who are currently above grade level are given credit for maintaining at that level is because, well, there are a number of reasons, but one of them is there's a ceiling effect. At a certain level, you cannot, if you're performing at the top of the scale in fourth grade and the top of the scale in fifth grade, that's as much as you can be measured at. Whether the issue is what the new test will be able to measure, right? And we don't know that yet. If the new test will have a vertically integrated scale that will allow you to directly measure where between K and 12 that student is performing on a one consistent scale, you can certainly, push for continued improvement every year, regardless of the ceiling. We don't happen to know yet how the new test will measure growth, so it's hard to comment specifically on the pros and cons of that idea, which is another thing that as we get into our recommendations for reconsidering growth and taking the time to reconsider how we measure growth, we really feel that the timeline at this point should allow for a full year transition where we take a year off of the grades, and Trey will get into this more, and spend this time figuring out how we measure growth most appropriately on the new assessment. Because at this point, we don't know what the test is going to be, so it's difficult to pass appropriate rules based on that. And I don't know if you want to get into this now. And then
I think you make some real good points. I want to try very quickly. We have Superintendent Vitti on the line, and we're trying to see if we know he's got some very specific concerns and questions about this question around college readiness and accelerated coursework, and see if we can get over some technical hurdles here and ask him to chime in now. I know he's on mute, and we'll see if we can hear him then.
Dr. Vitti, are you
Can you hear me,
there?
Trey? I'm
Great,
here.
we can hear you.
Okay, good. Hi, Trey, Jason.
Hey.
Hello.
Is Deidre there too? Is that Deidre?
Yep.
Okay, hi. Yeah, I've been on the phone since the beginning. I think both Trey and Jason did a good job of outlining what the proposal is and the pros and cons of it. Specifically at the high school level, as Jason indicated, my concern is that we would possibly be moving backward when it comes to transforming our high schools in moving into a college-going culture. Over the past 3 years, based on the addition of acceleration, participation, performance, college readiness, we've seen dramatic shifts in culture at the high school level. Historically in Florida, the high school experience from an accountability point of view was only focused on FCAT. And somewhat the ACT and the SAT as used as a concordance score for those students that didn't pass the gatekeeper in FCAT reading and math, and the ACT and the SAT started to be used more and more. And that began to change the focus from FCAT only. But we saw significant change over the last 3 years by including acceleration as defined by advanced placement classes, industry certification, dual enrollment, international baccalaureate, and ACE or Cambridge. And so what has happened in Florida and specifically in Duval is students that would normally not be enrolled in acceleration courses have been enrolled. And so historically, those students that qualify for free and reduced lunch, ESE students, ELL students, and minority students have not historically been in those classes at large numbers, and that has changed throughout Florida because the metrics have changed, and what is measured is often done. And this is why, purely from an accountability perspective, why those numbers change. We can always say, well, that should have happened before, but it wasn't happening. And what you measure changes systems and processes and expectations, even by force sometimes, and that's why accountability is important. My concern with the current proposal, I am comfortable with the elementary and middle school proposition. I'm concerned at the high school level because I believe that without a true acceleration participation component, you'll actually create a disincentive for schools to put average academic students in acceleration classes. Now, the current proposal is to have 100 points on acceleration performance. However, the way that the proposal is right now is that would only be your denominator for those 100 points would be your ninth grade cohort coming into the high school level. And students would have, schools would have between the 9th and 12th grade year to put a student in at the minimal or maximum level in one acceleration related course, and that they complete it successfully. If that happens between 9th and 12th grade, then you receive a point on a numerator side. And my concern with that is there's no clear incentive to challenge students to take more acceleration courses. And again, acceleration can not only mean more of the college-going acceleration in dual enrollment, IB, ACE, and advanced placement, but also the work-ready component being industry certification. So obviously we would be taking a step backward by making the requirement only one class and passing it between 9th and 12th grade. The other thing that has positively changed throughout Florida and in Duval is more kids taking the ACT, the SAT, and PERT, which is a college placement test. We have seen dramatic increases in our students that are qualified for free and reduced lunch, and minority students taking the ACT and the SAT in order to obtain that college-ready score. Historically, for the most part, middle class, upper middle class students took the ACT and the SAT because it was promoted in the home. And for a lot of students that are growing up in poverty or whose parents didn't go to college, they don't quite know how to navigate the system as well to have their child arrive to receiving a scholarship or college entry requirements. And so the system itself was doing, the high school system, the public school system was doing this because of the college readiness component. you will hear, and Jason did mention that the thinking is, well, since we're moving to new standards that are more college ready, and the end of course exams promote that college ready culture, that in itself will lead to this continuation of the college going culture. Although that is somewhat true that the standards drive the expectations, ultimately no one looks at an end of course exam result to determine college readiness. College readiness has been and will continue to be defined by the ACT, the SAT, and the PERT, or the new college placement test. And although there's legislation currently on the books that prevents a college from placing a student in a remediation class, most colleges look at the ACT, the SAT, and the PERT as an objective way to determine whether that child should go into a remediation class or not. And that still continues to happen because it's an objective number. That objective number has led schools and kids to think more about college ready status than it ever has before. And I'm very, very concerned that will happen. Last point, and very open to questions, is Jason's concern regarding lag data. In the name of simplification, we should not water down accountability and create additional confusion. It makes little sense to hold a principal, admin team, teachers, and even students, and therefore parents accountable to lag data. That would mean essentially for graduation rate and acceleration, you're using the year previous. Well, a lot can happen in 1 year. New systems, new processes, new interventions. We should hold, if we want the accountability system to matter, we need to make it real time and linked to the individuals that are implementing the systems and processes and expectations to do things better for kids. And 1 year behind does not allow that to do that. And as has been mentioned earlier, it'll create additional confusion in an already chaotic environment when it comes to Florida accountability. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Vitti. We appreciate that. If you have questions, please continue to submit them online. We've gotten a couple in, but we wanted to take a break at this moment, and we're going to put up a poll question asking, how accurate do you view the current school grading system in evaluating school performance? And so if you can go ahead and provide us some feedback, we think it'd be really interesting for the populace that's on the poll to understand where folks are at this point.
And if you have questions for Dr. Vitti, I think he's agreed to stay on the call for a little bit, so go ahead and send those. In the meantime, we'll take a question from Kate. Kate asks, Florida experienced major growth and accelerated coursework between 2000 and 2009, tied to teacher bonuses and PSAT given statewide. If these components stay in place, wouldn't we still see continued growth in AP and tech certification enrollment, even if high schools are no longer graded for them? I don't know, Dr. Vitti, if you want to speak to that, or
Sure, I'll take that. Not necessarily. Again, that system had been in place previously, and we did not see the type of gains that we saw regarding enrollment of minority and just average academic students, and especially those that were disadvantaged. So I don't think that is enough of an incentive to push students to take more rigorous courses. Something that I did mention earlier is that I don't believe that the system as it is now is perfect. I do think that there are flaws. I do think there could be an opportunity to shift acceleration more to the performance side than the participation. But a lot of legislators are a bit confused in that when this new grading system was implemented, participation was weighted more heavily than performance. And there was, in a sense, gaming happening, unfortunately, where more kids were put in participation that may not be ready for acceleration courses, and schools benefited from that, even though they may have not done well in those courses. Over the years, that has been modified to where it's equally leveled now, so that it is no longer, it's actually a disincentive to put a student in an acceleration class that won't pass the class. So that's important to mention, because I think I hear that a lot from legislators as I've been lobbying over the past week.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Vitti and Kate. one thing this came up while Dr. Vitti was speaking. We'll put the results back up, but we asked everybody how accurate is the current school grading system in evaluating school performance, and a plurality of folks said that it was really split between somewhat accurate and somewhat inaccurate. So I think that really sets the stage for our next piece of information here, which is really around where do things sit right now, and what's going on. Dr. Vitti mentioned that he was in Tallahassee. What's going on in the state legislature right now? So, as we all know from high school civics, we have two chambers in the legislature. And so on the Senate side of the House, Senate Bill 1642 really mostly reflects the Department of Education proposal. There has been an amendment made to return credit for middle school accelerated coursework participation and performance. There's also a separate Senate bill that was filed by Senator Montfort, who's from the Tallahassee region, who puts forth a proposal that the Superintendent's Association had pushed, which was for a 3-year transition plan for both to the new testing, delaying school grade, the first issuance of school grades until 2017 and 18. To be quite honest, I think I was in Tallahassee last week. I think everybody recognizes that bill is probably not moving by itself too far. However, there is a lot of talk about what pieces from that bill may be appropriate to incorporate into the overall Senate Bill 1642. On the House side, Commissioner Stewart and many of the key House members held a workshop last week on school grading, and they're expected to file a bill and for a meeting later this week. We expect that bill to be available tomorrow. And so there's lots of work happening really as we speak. This is a hot topic for discussion. It really is a must-pass bill in the House and the Senate, and something that both the legislators throughout Tallahassee are really focused on. As we look forward at key points and key questions for the legislature to consider, there are questions regarding this transition time. And so as we look at the current proposal, it calls for tentative school grades to be issued immediately following the shift to the new test. We have many concerns over how growth will be calculated and whether it will be calculated fairly and appropriately without a single year for baseline data. So we have, when Jacksonville Public Education Fund staff were in Tallahassee over the last couple of weeks, we've had a number of conversations with legislators encouraging them to consider the idea of a single transition year where school grades would not be issued. And that's not a universally well accepted proposal, but it did fall on legislators who are very willing to listen. I think there's a strong evidence from other states, including the state of Texas, that when you make a transition with new standards, new tests, and a new accountability system, that suspending grades for a single year makes a lot of sense and helps the public really understand that we're looking at a completely new way of evaluating schools. Not to mention the questions around baseline, around the baseline for growth. And as Jason spoke about, we think there's a lot of questions about what are the best ways to measure growth. And so we think those are a number of things that could happen during this single year transition year. As we look at the formula issues, I think we've sort of beaten that horse to death. We know that there is these questions about college readiness, at-risk graduation rate, accelerated coursework that still need to be addressed. And then this question about alignment issues and how do we, as a state, align our teacher evaluation system with our school evaluation system. Right now, growth in particular is calculated in two very, very different ways on both of those systems. And it, from our perspective, really leads to a significant amount of confusion between the school evaluation system and the teacher evaluation system, and that those two metrics do not always move in the same direction. Similarly, Jason has spoken about the idea of some sort of regular review period where instead of making 16 changes over the past 3 years, those changes are saved up and implemented periodically such that we have really good year-to-year data to compare. So clearly I've talked about most of the pieces here in terms of our recommendations. But we really think I want to particularly emphasize this third piece about how student growth is measured, and getting a sense as to what is the proper method. In our paper, we highlight 4 different potential mechanisms for measuring growth, all with different uh, different pros and cons. And this is not an easy black or white decision, but something we believe very strongly needs to be considered from a number of different angles. Because without that, we really have significant concerns about the fairness of the system. So with that, wanted to move to an opportunity. I think we have a couple more questions.
Yep. So we have a couple questions from Ken. Ken, you're doing awesome with the questions. First, we have the commissioner indicated that there will be no bonus points or automatic adjustments. Will the banking of points from those students that pass end of course exams at the middle school level continue to be banked? Not sure, Ken, Dr. Vitti, have you heard anything about that up in Tallahassee?
I'm still on. My understanding is that those would not be banked, and it would just go to the middle school level.
Okay, great. And then,
so meaning if you're taking an end of course exam at the middle school level, it is linked to the middle school accountability component.
Got it. And then the other question is, why 2 accountability systems? Why not base the grade on the value-added model? If the student met their predicted score, shouldn't that be a learning gain?
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of the questions that needs to be considered. Certainly, there's been a lot of press across the state over the last couple of weeks around the value-added measure, and it's something that deserves more discussion. I think that there is some argument to be made that when you get to a school level, for a school level value-added score, that the number of individual number of individual students that are part of that score makes that score much more accurate and much lower standard errors than on a teacher by teacher basis. When you have a teacher who's teaching 18 students versus a school of 1,800 students, but that's just currently not part of the discussion. The term learning gains is used in the legislation. It's used very broadly. I would argue, and I'm not a lawyer, but I would argue that it gives a lot of flexibility to the Department of Education and the State Board of Education as to how learning gains should be calculated. But I think that's an important issue for further discussion. And when we talk about this idea of a 1-year transition period, it gives the state, particularly the State Department of Education and the State Board of Education, a full year to have discussions about what is the proper way to measure growth and how should these 2 systems interact.
Right, and I would completely agree. I think that's one of the areas that we would want to look at. One of our major concerns with talking about this 1-year transition is moving immediately to implement baseline grades next year, which are even if they're informational and not for accountability, there are all sorts of issues with how are you going to measure growth between 2 different tests when you don't have the initial baseline year, of one test. The answer is, in all likelihood, you're going to try to link the new test to the old test. This is something that we've seen very recently when FCAT switched to FCAT 2.0. We saw the problems it causes in, public confusion, public, misunderstanding when you release one set of grades and then you release another set of grades later. There are a number of issues with that, and it's not even necessarily to say that statistically it would be indefensible, but it is true that statistically we don't know how aligned those 2 tests will be at this point because we don't know what the new test is. So we don't know how appropriate it would be to link one test to another. So all of those things tie into this same discussion, which is, at the very least, if you link those 2, you would be measuring growth the same way you do now. And for a number of reasons, we feel like it's more appropriate to take that year off, spend that time looking at multiple different options for measuring growth in a way that's more stable and meaningful and aligned with other systems. And one of those options may be a value-added model similar to what the teachers do, or the exact same model, which, frankly, the current teacher value-added model already calculates a school effect. And so you wouldn't need to duplicate efforts. You could just decide you're going to use the school effect that's already calculated in the current teacher model and attribute that to teachers, or some combination of the school effect and the teacher effect to give the school credit for all of that. But these are all things that the current transition doesn't allow time to think about. And at the very least, even if the formula didn't change, if we came back after 1 year, we would directly be comparing growth from the first year on the new test to the second year on the new test, as opposed to from the current test to the new test. So I think that question is right on, and our thought is we just need time to explore that.
Great. So we have another question from Barbara. She asks if the state has run any simulations to determine the impact of the change to college ready factors. Do we know if the state has done any modeling of any of these future possibilities?
Not that I'm aware of, and I know some of the committee members in the legislature have asked for that. I'm not aware that it's available yet for a couple of reasons.
Yeah, if I could just jump in real quick.
Yeah.
Having worked at the department, you don't come up with formulas unless you run simulation. So I'll keep it at that.
But yeah, but too, I think
I'm not sure it's publicly available. Yeah, is how I should clarify that then.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. So we're going to put out another poll. We want to ask you just one or two more questions, and the first is just to sort of evaluate, what you've heard today. And so the question is, after what you've heard at today's, session so far, how well do you feel you understand this issue about school grades? And continue submitting your questions. We do have just a few more minutes for questions.
And as we wait for those results to come in, definitely want to also encourage all of you to get involved. As we've said, the briefing paper that we wrote earlier this winter is available on our website, and so we'd encourage you to do that. And then we'll also talk about some ways that you can further elevate your voices into the discussion. So first, though, as we look at how well everyone says they understand this issue, we see that overwhelmingly that it's at least as clear as mud, hopefully somewhat clearer for everyone. That 73% of the callers said that they understand it somewhat well. Nearly a quarter said very well, and so we hope that this is that the last hour has been a real education for everyone. And definitely, as I said, I think we may have a couple more questions, Deirdre.
Yeah, we just have a couple more. The first is, would it be possible for the Department of Education to issue school grades without growth scores for the first 2 years, like was done in 1999, and then issue grades that include growth in the third year, as in 2001?
It would certainly be possible, and I invite Trey and Dr. Vitti as well to other thoughts. But my thought on that is, it would certainly be possible. I would not recommend it for a number of reasons. First and foremost, being that what we need is stability in the system right now, and we need, if we're moving to a new system and we take the time to get it right, I think a clean break, the year off, will really make it clear in people's heads that we've moved to a new system, and that we're not connecting this directly with the old system. But more importantly, whether you use linking the old test to the new test, or you issue baseline grades without growth, what you're doing is just going to confuse people more by issuing grades based on one set of standards this year, and then another set of standards the next year, and then a third set of standards where you say, okay, well, these are the real grades that we're going to use. And especially if people know you're transitioning to that, it really undermines, well, what do the grades mean now? There's really no reason that all of the same information that would be included in a grade that doesn't include growth, in terms of proficiency on the test and graduation rates and all those things, all of that information is currently issued separately, and would continue to be issued separately. So there's no reason that you would not be able to provide schools and community members with that baseline information without putting it into the ABCDF format that may confuse people as you continue to change what that means. I think that the best thing to do from a public trust standpoint is to take the time to get it right and implement the full system when you come back.
Okay, we're going to put out one more poll for you. We just want to have an idea of what you see your role as being. So just select one of the following if it does apply to you. We'd love to know who's on the call and some idea of what the part that you play in public education is.
Great.
And then we've got just time, I think, for about one more question. And that is, what are the plans for 10th graders that have taken the FCAT 2.0 and not passed? Will they be allowed to continue taking this test as it is phased out, or will they have to take the new test and start over? It probably goes
Yeah.
for third graders as
Yeah,
well.
I believe they what the provisions are for them to continue taking the FCAT. That's generally what's happened in the past. I'm not sure if the legislation at this point is specific on that. Dr. Vitti, do you have any further illumination on that point?
Yeah, in times past, when we've gone, for example, from the old standards to the new standard, so Florida State Sunshine State Standards 2.0, if you will, we've always reverted for those kids back to the assessment that they were originally judged on from a gatekeeper perspective. So I would imagine that would continue even when we went from, let's say, the 10th grade FCAT to algebra as being the gatekeeper. We still went back to when they were in that grade level, what test was used if they did not pass. And they had the option of passing both. That has historically been the case. I would imagine that would be the case moving forward.
Great, thank you. That would be our expectation as well. So again, before we close out, just encourage you to visit our website at jaxpef.org/schoolgrades. There is an opportunity, some easy to use tools for all of you, particularly those of you both who work with school systems as well as parents and other community members, to please reach out to your legislators. I was in Tallahassee last week. Dr. Vitti's there now. Both Jason and Deirdre have been there over the past couple of weeks, and there is an eagerness to hear from community members. And so I think if you have have strong ideas or perspectives on this, we'd encourage you to share those. Would also encourage you to share your concerns, particularly around the idea of a 1-year transition period. And finally, and would encourage you, if you found today's content helpful, please encourage your colleagues and friends and relatives to join us at 7:30 this evening for a second version of this webinar, and also a taped version of this webinar will be available on our website over the next couple of days. So please encourage other people to join us. We think it's very important that the community understand this issue more in depth. So with that, I think we're all done. So thank you all so much for your time. We really appreciate it, and we hope that this feedback has been helpful. If you have further feedback either about this issue or specifically about the webinar format for the distribution of this type of information, please let us know. A good email to reach all of us is info@jaxpef.org. Please reach out and let us know how well this worked, if this worked, and what we can do to further the discussion in our state of important issues like this in the months to come. We appreciate it, and 7 minutes early, we're going to wish everyone a great Monday afternoon.